Thank you everyone for joining us for a special 6th edition of Unplanned. It is my pleasure to welcome this panel of housing experts to the Unplanned series. So our panel today includes Neil Lovett, a licensed professional planner and certified planning technician at Turner Drake & Partners, Jason Paul, a licensed realtor and the host of the Halifax Real Estate Podcast, and Kevin Hooper, Manager of Partnerships and Community Development at United Way. There is quite a lot of discussion surrounding this topic, so we do have quite a few questions to dive into.
I guess the easy answer is there's no easy way to get public housing, subsidized housing. The options are limited. Technically, they're limited to seniors and families. Most units are full and the waiting lists are years long. There's something in the order of 30,000 new units needed within this province in the very short term. That kind of reflects on the number of people out there really struggling and the projection for growth. There's a huge need, not nearly enough supply, and not nearly enough resources going into the programming to ensure people have affordable housing.
The point about the capacity relative to the need is really important. The actual social housing inventory, the entirety of it, everything we've built since the 60s essentially, adds up to 12,000 units. So more than double what we already have is needed. The issue is about making up for an extended period of under or disinvestment in our social housing stock.
We've been having our supply in the single family residential market being devoured, and we're not recovering those units. So when we're talking about the supply issue, it does correlate towards the residential real estate market as well, and it's what we're seeing in this province and why we're in dire need of more supply as well.
It's not being built because the people who we're talking about in this scenario, they do not make enough money to pay what a developer requires to build a building. So unless you are subsidized, incentivized, obligated in some way, you're not going to build it.
To realistically achieve the goals that have been set out in terms of 30,000 new units, I think the city has to find a way to obtain that, but I think you do have to get creative in a sense of it would take probably the government, private and non-public sector all coming together as one. If those three come together, we can find a way to solve this problem. But until they do, I agree with Kevin that developers are the ones who are going to bail us out of this, and they're not incentivized enough to bail us out.
The conversation sort of, to me, really well represents, I think, one of the shortcomings of the way that we're thinking about this issue, which is just how do we get developers to solve it? How do we find a market solution to what is a non-market problem? That's ultimately what the housing issue boils down to, is are we willing to allocate the resources we have as society to solve it or not?
As far as where we're willing to put our money as a society, our resources, we did it before. Since the early 90s, we just stopped investing in these things. And a generation later, we're seeing the outcome of that lack of investment. The Nova Scotia Affordable Housing Commission, one of their recommendations includes looking at housing as investment spending, right? Like as infrastructure spending.
There's certainly ample academic evidence that by far the least expensive way for societies to address homelessness is to provide housing for free. That need doesn't go away if we don't meet it. If we don't spend it on housing, those costs show up elsewhere. They show up in the healthcare system, in the criminal justice system. We're already spending the money, and we're actually spending more than we need to. There's the sort of lost economic activity that occurs in a community when their residents are spending too much on rent or too much on their mortgage. There's also certainly an immediate kind of economic benefit in that activity, just in terms of job creation and sort of those spin-off spending ripples. First and foremost, it should be the province. They've got the mandate, the legislative requirement that they're in charge of social housing. And then at the municipal level, there doesn't seem to be really much of an appetite for being bold about it.
They all have a responsibility for leadership. They have a platform to advocate and pursue the interests of society as a whole. Public figures in government at any order across the country have not been doing that as it relates to housing.
If the city, the provincial, province, and the federal government do not choose to act soon, I would genuinely be concerned as to what is exactly going to happen. We currently have no new subdivisions approved. We're at least 2 or 3 years out for all the development to take place. And we're just not acting efficiently and quickly enough to get these things done.
The biggest and longest standing unmet need is for youth. And also the other big one is single parent households, and especially female-led single parent households. Really what's missing is the housing, not just in terms of cost, but also the unit styles that meet those needs.
The market, it's serving a need, but is it serving all needs? You could definitely say it's not. When you're talking about the needs being met or what supply is being currently made in apartments and condos, they're being made, but they're setting a certain price point that is unobtainable for most low-income families.
Population projections have been surpassed year over year for the last number of years. We're not building in a way or to a level that is going to come anywhere near meeting that kind of demand. So I don't think we can kind of look forward based on what we know from the past. I think we need to start looking forward based on a lot of different kind of factors, different variables introduced to the system. We're not building housing due to prejudice in the system as well. Limitations within the policy regime that don't allow certain types of housing to be built, not because they're not affordable. Rooming houses, for example, there's poverty in the system, and there's also kind of social, cultural marginalization in the system that is very real. To address some of the housing issues we're facing is going to really require a very targeted approach that kind of empowers groups of people who have been historically marginalized, and we need to redress that, or else we are, chosen to perpetuate that problem.
There is a very well-established academic literature around the impacts of new construction on rents. They don't themselves drive up rents, they actually limit or mitigate the rise in rents. But the idea that new supply will lower rents just in and of itself isn't accurate. You can't build your way to lower rents because new development is the most expensive, it's on the margins, and it doesn't happen until the price pressure below it in the existing stock builds up to make it viable. So we have to allow and have new development, even if it doesn't immediately help the people we think are in most need. There's a huge latent resource in our existing housing stock that is a potential for increasing the supply of affordable housing in a much more financially efficient way.
As much as growth, new units are needed, it's not housing as we've known it or as we're talking about it today. It's a commodity. I'm talking about our policies as they relate to existing housing. We've had a lot of affordable housing that's just been lost because there's just nothing in the system to control, that free market approach for real estate. Sooner or later, we have to start talking about how we rejig the system, not only so that we can produce more units going forward, but to save what we have. A government's platform and their budget indicates a certain set of priorities, and they get their mandate from the public by and large, and we need to be smart about what we're investing in. I think, the voting public really is the voice that directs those policies.
You also can educate yourself more and more on this topic, and you can try and see what is exactly the reason we are in this crisis, trying to understand what's exactly happening in your community, in the market right now, what's projected in the future.
The reality is that housing, it is political, fundamentally. This problem's been long-standing, but it's only been in recent years that it's really seemed to kind of blow up as a true political lightning rod. It's because those who didn't struggle at all are either now starting to struggle or see the reality that they could get more active, write to your counselor, write to your MLA, your MPs. Like, it sounds like a small thing, but that's really what drives it, because it is solvable. It's just the pressure needs to be there for politicians to solve it.
Once again, I hope this unplanned episode, this conversation kind of acts as a catalyst for further discussion on issues of inclusion and accessibility in the housing sector, and hopefully it kind of inspires some of our viewers who are watching right now or who are watching in the future to become involved in issues of housing. Thank you again to our panelists, and we will sign off now.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Neil.
Thanks, everyone.
Halifax.
Guys.
Yeah, it was fun.
Bye.
Bye.